Okay, so here we are, exploring Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Here, Solomon is going to detail some of the specifics about what he had chased after in his quest for purpose in these vanities of life under the sun. If your Bible translation that you're using has headers in it, you can see this chapter is sectioned off into three different categorized vanities. We have the vanity of self indulgence, the vanity of living wisely, and the vanity of toil. So let's look at the first section here, verses 1 through 11. The word of the Lord says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was a vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great, and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil that I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. End quote. So, all right, let's break these apart a little bit. He first attempts pleasure and laughter. And the Hebrew word for pleasure used here is simcha, which refers to a state of happiness at a sensory level. So Solomon is ramping up here to engage in this experiment to experience every iota of enjoyment that he can see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. So where does he start? Well, let's try comedy. Maybe there's some purpose here in comedy. Laughter's good medicine, as the saying goes, so maybe if we just lighten up a little bit and partake in some silliness and some shenanigans, we'll forget the trials of our mundane and routine lives under the sun. Now, undoubtedly, Solomon had access to court jesters and fools who would perform their, comedy or maybe their song and dance routines and some slapstick. I'm sure everybody thought it was a real hoot, but eventually it comes to an end. The laughter stops and the hall grows silent again, so what's to be done? Well, hey, bring in some more fools for some more entertainment. And on and on and on the parade continues. Now, this has been going on since the beginning of time. You have fallen people seeking entertaining distractions to avoid looking at the realities of life. It can, and has been for a great number of people, become a form of escapism. And, tragically, I believe it's only gotten worse as our technology advances. I can think back to growing up in the early 80s. We were extremely bored. Like a lot. We were extremely bored. We didn't have smartphones that gave us, instant on-demand access to all manner of distractions. So we learned to just sit and wait. Relatives are over, relatives are visiting, or you're going to somebody else's house to visit with the grandparents or aunts and uncles, whatever. What are you going to do? You're going to sit and wait. You're sitting in the car on a long road trip, maybe. You're going to sit and wait. You're going to count the telephone poles or play, maybe I Spy, but for the most part, you're going to sit and you're going to wait until the trip's over. But maybe there was a blessing to that. I think there is. I think it grows in the individual the ability to reflect and to contemplate and to engage in some introspection, this internal dialogue that a lot of us from that generation have that you don't really see a lot in current generations. But now as an adult, I can use that. I can go out back and just sit. I can just be a person engaged in his own thoughts without this continual need for some kind of input or some kind of stimulus. And I kind of worry that upcoming generations are losing that ability with some really disastrous results. I'd read a study once before that showed the average attention span in the early 2000s was only about 3 minutes. In 2012, it was just over a minute. In 2020, it was 30 seconds. Today, it's 8 seconds. The average attention span is 8 seconds today. It has become super difficult for us to be able to quiet our minds and to stifle distractions. What does that do? It makes it very difficult for us at times to pray, to study scripture, to meditate on the word. We are really up against it. This onslaught of a constant pull on our attention elsewhere. It becomes so easy just to pick up the phone and look for some form of entertainment. Hey, Siri, tell me a joke. YouTube, entertain me. I want to make a distinction here because, the knee-jerk response to this can sometimes be, there's nothing wrong with having a sense of humor, is there? Well, no, there's not. Personally, I think I'm hilarious. And I usually find out when people first meet me, it's like, oh, you're so funny. You've got such a great sense of humor. But then 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit later, it's, dude, do you ever take anything seriously? So the difference, I think, here is self-control. And there is a distinction between mindless laughter and joy. Because if you look through the Bible, the use of the word laughter is more often than not used in a negative connotation. I will laugh at your calamity. The fool rages and laughs. We have become a laughingstock to our enemies. You shall be laughed at and held in derision, etc. But laughter is different than joy. Even happiness is different than joy. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. Laughter is associated with the sort of mindless behavior of fools. I've been in bars before, and I've heard the sounds of riotous laughter and carousing, but it's not joyful. It seems kind of just hollow and empty. On the other side of that, conversely, I love hearing the sounds of our fellowship as a church body. After the service is over, we just gather together and we talk and we laugh. And I love hearing that laughter of my brothers and sisters in Christ because it's rooted in joy, good, godly joy that's just filled with the Spirit. And the wise man knows that difference. And he can have joy in the midst of all of this vanity that we have to experience. Solomon, though, found nothing but emptiness in his quest for laughter. So what was next? Hey, let's try some wine, all right? Maybe there's an answer here at the bottom of a bottle. The first part of verse 3 says, quote, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, end quote. Now, I will preface this section by stating that I am not a teetotaler by any stretch. Anybody that knows me can attest to that. I have met and I am good friends with many a brother who, by the dictates of their own conscience, abstain from alcohol completely. And while I don't have the same conviction, I can still respect theirs, and I'm careful not to be a stumbling block when I'm out to dinner with them or socializing with them. I hold to the notion that alcohol in general is not prohibited by Scripture, but drunkenness is. So, much like a good sense of humor, this also comes down to a matter of self-control. As with many other things that we can eat or drink, put into our bodies, these things are inanimate objects, inherently neither really good nor bad in and of themselves, but it's the motivation of the individual that draws the line between what is good use and what is not good use. So Solomon, the wisdom for performing this experiment is still with him, and he's still searching with his whole heart to cheer his whole body with wine and how to lay a hold on folly. He is in it. He is fully committed to this. So, I don't believe this was him having a glass of wine with dinner. Okay, this seems more like he's on an intentional several-day bender to see if there's any purpose to be found once all the cups are empty. And at the end of all the carousing, the result was just as empty as the cups. And there's no transcendent significance to the debauchery, and the problems were still there once the hangover wears off. All right, well, So that didn't work. Well, what about food? Maybe there's an answer in food. I love food. I love to eat. I got no problem with people who enjoy food. Solomon was dedicated to the pursuit of every pleasure imaginable, and huge feasts were certainly lumped into this category. Real quick, we're going to skip over to 1 Kings chapter 4, 20 and 23. Again, that's 1 Kings 4, 22 and 23. We're going to take a look at what was on the menu at Chez Solomon. So 1 Kings 4, 22 and 23 says, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. Whoa. Okay. So let's put this into some context in our mind's eye, okay? You read this and, okay, that sounds like a lot, but let's really imagine this and run the numbers here. So a core was about 6 bushels or 220 liters. In a sense, I am not a metric guy. 220 liters is about 58 gallons. So 30 cores of fine flour is 1,740 gallons. That is roughly 31 55-gallon drums of flour. Double that for the grain meal. So 31 55-gallon drums of flour, 62 drums of grain meal. Now, from one fat oxen, you'd probably expect about 1,000 pounds of usable meat. He got 10 of those. So 10,000 pounds of ox meat. You figure about 500 pounds of beef from your average cow times 20 of those, that's another 10,000 pounds of beef. Typically, you get about 50 pounds of mutton from a sheep. Times that by 100, you've got 5,000 pounds of meat right there. Plus an unspecified amount of venison and turkey. So you average about 60 pounds of meat per deer, roebuck, or gazelle, and that's about 15 pounds also per fattened turkey. So all told, final tally, 93 huge drums of milled grain and flour, 20,000 pounds of grass-fed beef, 5,000 pounds of lamb chops, and let's just estimate 5,000 pounds of venison and bird. Okay? To visualize this, in terms of just the meat alone, this would look like the equivalent of 6 Ford F-150s parked side by each. Okay, the grain would be stacked floor to ceiling, wall to wall, in an average 10-foot by 12-foot bedroom. Per day. Okay? You could fill Rupp Arena to capacity and feed everybody an entree and 2 sides twice over. That's how much food Solomon had in his daily allotment. Massive, massive amounts of food. Point being, the man knew how to eat. He knew how to throw a feast. He knew how to have people over and have a great food party. Okay? And yet, he still found no lasting enjoyment, purpose, or satisfaction in it. You know, I can get a $40 steak from Malone's, and I can feel like a king for a day, but it's only going to be for a day because I'll be hungry again the next day. As much as we may try to find some sort of transcendent experience with the best food at the best, most exclusive restaurants, we're still going to come to the same conclusion as he did, time and time and time again, madness and folly. However, the wise man will know this. The wise man knows this. Yet, he can still eat, drink, and be merry anyway, because he'll recognize these things as a gift from God, and all of God's gifts are meant to be enjoyed by his people. But for Solomon, the food, the wine, the entertainment, the madness, and the folly didn't fill the void, and it was determined by him that they ended up as just more vanity and striving after the wind. He was entertained, he ate, and he drank to the point of overflowing, but realized that come the next morning, he was still bored, still hungry, and still thirsty. So, what's the next form of escapism? You look at verses 4 through 6. These are Solomon's building projects, okay? Vast estates. He has these large, ornate buildings, vineyards, gardens, parks, trees, forests, pools, and the use of the words garden, pools, and growing, describing the trees, are the same words used in Genesis chapter 2. So you can in your mind bring about a very accurate picture of what this must have looked like. Okay, this was the equivalent, an earthly equivalent, a man-made equivalent of the Garden of Eden. All right, beautiful landscaping, beautiful orchards of fruit trees, and these crystal clear pools of water. You name it, if it was pretty, it was done by his crew. Okay. Remember back to verse 1 of this chapter, the definition of the word pleasure that he sought so deeply. This was a sensory pleasure, right? So these building projects were a sight to behold, a wonder to the eyes that set your heart all aflutter. All right, the likes of which we probably can't even imagine. When thinking of these gardens and ponds, though, like I said, these are replicas. These are man-made replicas, aren't they? We try so hard to emulate and manipulate God's creation, and we wonder why we're not satisfied with it. Solomon found this out too. But guys, it's in our nature, isn't it? Men, I'm speaking to the men here. It's in our nature to build, to create, to expand, to plant, to move earth. This is a gift from the Lord, to be productive, to work, to be good stewards of what he's given us, to work with our hands, and we can take joy in the fruit of our labors. But like with all the other vanities of this world, it can be a double-edged sword, can't it? So I will confess to you all that one of my biggest besetting sins is escaping into projects to avoid dealing with things. Things get hot, go do something constructive, right? It's been hanging on me since I was a child. You get in trouble, first thing I do is go to my room and busy myself with making something. Clay, wood, wire, wax, construction paper, paints, whatever. It didn't matter. I escaped into doing something with my hands. And today it is absolutely not that different at all. Things get heated. My first instinct, head into the garage, head into the shop, see what kind of project I can get into rather than dealing with whatever the issue is. If I can't find success in one particular type of issue, I'll turn to inanimate things and find success there. Avoidance and escapism through being busy. And, newsflash, it doesn't work because the problems don't go away no matter what you build. It's still vanity. So, on a larger scale, but I believe with a similar motivation, Solomon sought these projects as a means to try to find some significance and meaning in his life, something he can slap his name on and call it good. But how many of these buildings and works can we still see today? So last time I checked, cedar and cypress were pretty flammable materials, and the city of Jerusalem has been burned to the ground more than once. All right, but maybe through modern archaeology, we might find a post or a beam or a lintel or a joist here or there, but none of it remains in any usable condition, and it's certainly not to the extent of what it looked like when it was built. Our pride may be inflated for a while because, oh, wow, look how nice this thing looks. I built this with my hands. This looks awesome. But the hourglass ticks away. Keeps ticking away. Time keeps rolling on. Materials deteriorate. They rot. They collapse. The rubble gets cleared away and something new is built in its place. And given enough time, that's going to rot and fall down and collapse or be torn down as well, and on and on and on throughout time. The whole, man, would you look at that? Parade marches on. Maybe that's why the older we get, when we give street directions to somebody, it includes something like, well, take a left where the old record store used to be, or down past where Blockbuster was, and then take a right where that IGA used to be. Everything used to be, right? What else did Solomon gather? Verses 7 and 8. He gathered slaves, herds, flocks, silver, gold, treasure, singers, and women. All of these things were used as covenant blessings from God to the people of Israel. God's promises to his people, if they followed his commands: land, houses, great food, vineyards, flocks and herds, servants, workers, buildings, etc. And God promised Solomon directly to give him riches and honor. And God delivered on that purpose. We're going to skip back to 1 Kings again. Let's take a look at 1 Kings 10, 14 through 27. We're going to get a look at the specifics of this wealth and all of these things. So again, 1 Kings 10, 14 through 27. The word of the Lord says, "Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. besides that which came from the explorers, and from the business of the merchants, and from all the kings of the west, and from the governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the throne had a round top, and on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions standing beside the armrests, while 12 lions stood there, one on each end of a step on the 6 steps. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon, for the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. And once every 3 years the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought his presents, articles of silver and gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. Okay. So just to try and quantify the gold itself, just the gold itself, a talent of gold was about 110 pounds. Okay, Solomon received 666 talents of gold per year, so that's 73,260 pounds of gold. To put that into perspective, a pound of gold today is worth just around $30,000, 30 grand for a pound of gold. That much gold today would be worth $2,197,800,000 per year. $2 billion worth of gold per year in today's numbers. And again, that's just the gold. So what's the point, Joe? Well, the point is, the dude was loaded, okay? What else? Aside from the gold and the treasures, the buildings, the slaves, the flocks, the vineyards, the orchards, and the impeccable landscaping, he had music. The best musicians, male and female, the best instruments, undoubtedly making the best music that the world at that time could produce. But much like his experiment in comedy and entertainment, what's going to happen? The hall's going to get quiet again once the music stops. Well, what's to be done? Fire up the band for more music. Bigger this time. Maybe something with a touch of melancholy to it, because I'm in the mood for it and I've had a rough day, despite being a wise and wealthy king. You know what? Scratch that. Let's play something funky and upbeat, well, to please everybody that's here in this court at this feast. Hey, we are partying here tonight with wine by the bathtub full, and we've got 60,000 pounds of meat to grill. All right? Harp lady, stretch your fingers. You're going to be here a while, okay? Oh. Maybe that's too big of a picture for us to imagine, all right? But how do we see this today? It used to be that only the ultra wealthy could afford to have musicians in their employment, right? But today, what can we do? We can cue up any song we want at any given point in time, suit whatever mood we're in. Oh, and add to that the use of Bluetooth speakers, and now everyone around you can listen to what you're listening to through this tiny buzzing speaker set at max volume. It's just ear pollution, right? Isn't that great? In the restaurant, on the hiking trail, at the lake, walking through town, noise, speakers, iPads, Bluetooths everywhere. So much all the time that you can't even think or have a decent conversation while you're trying to sit down to dinner. Day in, day out, on and on and on, fill all the empty, quiet spaces with some kind of audio intrusion. But guess what? Tomorrow, you'll likely need to experience it all over again because, God help us, we just can't seem to be alone with our own thoughts for more than 20 seconds. Well, at any rate, at last and certainly not least on this list of pleasures that Solomon sought with great gusto, the women. Here he just mentions concubines and leaves the wives out of it, but we can look at 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1, 2, and 3 for a bit more detail. Again, 1 Kings chapter 11, 1 through 3. The word of the Lord says, Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. End quote. Now you can go on, you can read the rest of that chapter and discover just how that all worked out for him. But suffice it to say, the last part of verse 3 sums it up. They turned away his heart. 1,000 women in and out of his court. Now, I'm not sure if that's a sum total or a snapshot of any given day. If it's a snapshot of any given day, that's 3 new women per day over the course of a year, assuming they worked in shifts, which sounds exhausting. Okay, the more logical conclusion would be that most of them were probably just like ceremonial wives and guests of the court, having been given to him in marriage by neighboring kingdoms, in order to solidify alliances or to show some kind of tribute. Hey, Solomon, let's enter into a trade agreement and you can have 3 of my daughters, that kind of thing. But regardless, in the context here, Solomon is pursuing pleasure, and that is a lot of women to keep track of. He summarizes his exploits here in verses 9 and 10. We'll start with verse 9. Quote, So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. End quote. Okay, so Solomon's wisdom, by his own admission, may have remained with him while he worked to attain all of this stuff. But I want to look at Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 17, to see what the law has to say about it. All right, let's look again. Deuteronomy 17, 14 through 17. The word of the Lord says, When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it, and you dwell in it, and then you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, You shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. Okay, so let's run through this checklist. Set a king? Check. God must choose the king? Check. One from among your brothers? Check. Not a foreigner. Check. Must not acquire many horses. Oh, there's strike 1. Shall not acquire many wives. Strike 2. Shall not acquire excessive gold and silver. And there's strike 3. You're out. So the gathering of things can be a snare. We can make it into an idol. God knows this, and that's why this decree was made to his people. So this sets the tone for the hotly debated item of God's sovereignty versus man's responsibility. And while God allowed this to happen, he certainly did not approve of it, since it was contrary to his law. This is an important distinction to make. God allowed this to happen, but it was not approved. God promised Solomon wealth and wisdom, and he delivered on that promise, but Solomon sought more and more and more and more, way beyond what he should have in this pleasure quest of his. Well, and what happens? At the end of the meal, when the bill comes due, there's a penalty to be paid for it. So back in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, let's look at verse 10. Solomon says, And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. So Solomon is the king over a vast kingdom. He had more money and resources that he could possibly spend, and what he said was done. So it's logical to think there was not a single vice that the world had to offer that he didn't participate in. Literally, everything the mind can think of, and likely many that we can't even comprehend, he had access to. and he saw this as the reward for all his toil. This is what he felt he deserved. I did all this work, I got all this stuff, it's mine to enjoy, so I'm going to enjoy it. But here's the rub. In that last part of verse 10, what does he do? He credits himself. This was my reward for all my toil. Not, this was the result of all the Lord's provision. The Lord blessed me abundantly, so I enjoyed these blessings. He attributes it to himself and his work. These were gifts from God, make no mistake about it. But as I mentioned before, God gives gifts to everybody, but he only gives the ability to enjoy them to his people. So there's two things at work here. When the gifts are used lawfully and humbly, and God receives the credit and the praise for it, things will likely go well. When the gifts are used unlawfully and pridefully, and God is not acknowledged for it, things will likely not go so well. So, what was the shocking conclusion? Let's look at verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. The conclusion? Bupkis. Nothing of lasting value. Vanity. Chasing a breeze. And as I've said before, here's Solomon at the top of his game. He is at the top as the king. And if this is his conclusion, ours will be exactly the same if we carry on with the same perspective. Okay, let's continue. Let's break this down into another section. We'll look at verses 12 through 17. Solomon says, So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceived that the same events happen to all of them. Then I said in my heart, What happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart, This also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. For all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Okay, so verse 12, Solomon is looking back. He's taking an account of all the experimentation that he's put himself through. He has dove head first into the pleasures of life. He has experienced everything that a man with limitless power, money, and resources can experience, and he is reflecting on the vanity of repetition by stating that all of these things will only be repeated. Nothing new will come out of similar experience done by others. The next king will have access to the same physical vices and will inevitably come to the same conclusion. And on and on and on and on, that will go all throughout history. We know this to be true as we've looked over all of these forms of escapism that Solomon has undertook. And we can relate to each and every one of them, one way or another. And if we come to the same conclusion that he has. Verses 13 and 14, he says that he saw that there was more gain in wisdom than in folly, just as there's more gain in light than darkness. So it's important to stress the context here, and the context is here, under the sun. Solomon's not speaking at this point of eternity. Understand this. His vexation is over what's happening in the here and now, and in our time on earth. This is very important to keep in mind over the next little bit here. So despite all of these activities being participated in under the sun, Solomon concludes that wisdom is still better than foolishness, and rightly so. It's better to walk in light than in darkness. It is better to be productive, to take care of your family, to love other people, to help one another, than it is to be unproductive, uncaring, unloving, and selfish. I don't think any of us would disagree with this. All right, the wise man is gifted with the ability to see things that the fool cannot. The wise man has discernment, he has self-control, he has reason. The fool has none of these things, and he staggers through life blind, feeding every greedy little impulse and appetite that he has whenever he has it. Okay? Though having said all of this, Solomon still hasn't told us why wisdom is better than foolishness. And in fact, he seems to struggle with it. in the next few verses. He ends verse 13 by saying that the same event happens to both the wise and the foolish. They both eat, they both are hungry again the next day. They both drink, they're both thirsty again the next day. They seek ways to entertain themselves, and they're still going to find themselves bored again once that's over with. At the basest of levels, the experiences of both the wise and the foolish usually will end up in the same place at the start of the next day. Verse 15, he says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity." So here he's pondering. Now he ponders the why of it all. What's the point of living wisely if on my last day I'm no better off than the fool on his last day? What's the point of being able to, see through the deceptions of mass media versus the fool who falls victim to it time and time again? What's the advantage of having a super philosophical view of society versus the fool who just kind of seems to go with the flow? Why does it make a difference if I can solve, complex mathematical equations? I can't, while the fool has to count on his fingers. The advantages of wisdom seem to fall a little short at the end of the day, if this is the case, all right? Wisdom might help us feel a little better about the experience. We might be able to make a little bit more money. We can think ourselves to be maybe in a better position than the fool, than we might have, in that we might have access to better and higher levels of sin and vice. I don't know. Kettle One vodka tastes a lot better than the rock gut that's on the bottom of the shelf, right? But what'll happen? You'll still be hungover in the morning. It might be easier to cry in a Mercedes-Benz than it is on a bicycle, but you're still crying. An expensive dinner at Malone's still has the potential to make you just as sick to your stomach as a six-pack of sliders from White Castle, all right? So regardless of the financial cost or the elevated status of the thing, the end result is still the same. And these things will need to be accounted for. Verse 16, "For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool." And here's the real meat and potatoes of this vexation. Okay, Solomon revisits the vanity of legacy here. And he reiterates that just like the fool, the wise is also going to be forgotten in the annals of history. And on their last day, they're both still going to assume room temperature. And again, this doesn't take into any account of what happens after we die. Again, remember, Solomon is only reflecting of life on this earth in the here and now up until the moment of death. Okay, he's not thinking eternally. So as we consider this, his frustration seems to make a little bit more sense. Does it matter what he's done, what he's built, what he's ate, what he's drank, what he's inhaled, who he's slept with, what he's been entertained by? Doesn't matter if the fool who's done the same things, albeit on a smaller scale, is still going to die and be forgotten just like him. The man who dies sitting on top of a huge pile of gold like Scrooge McDuck is still just as dead as Freddy the Freeloader who takes his last breath sleeping in a gutter. All right, the curse of being forgotten and the curse of death come for every single one of us, regardless if we're wise or if we're foolish. So, how did this revelation make Solomon feel? You go back to verse 17. What does he say? "So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and the striving after the wind." Solomon says he hated life, since all of these activities are grievous, they're unsatisfying, they're unfulfilling, and they'll ultimately lead us all to the same place anyway. Now, he might be engaging in a little hyperbole here. He might kind of be throwing a little bit of a fit when he says he hated his life. He might be giving into some emotional exuberance. Or he may be genuinely despondent over this place that wisdom has brought him to. After all, sometimes these personal revelations that are given to us by God, they can have a devastating impact on us, and they can bring us pretty low. The truth hurts sometimes. It's a little hard to say at this point. I try not to be overly critical about him because I've been in both states of mind, and I'm sure you have as well. We as Christians, we obviously ought to have a different perspective here. But let's think about this again in the context of where Solomon was thinking, strictly in the view of the temporary life here on earth. Is he way off base, thinking only as a mortal? I'll say personally, I can see the frustration, and I'll admit to having it from time to time. I ask myself a lot, what's the point of working hard, working overtime, struggling, working hard every day when on my left side, the government weasels are taking 30% of it and spending it on the most horrible things imaginable. And on the right side, you've got freeloaders who've never worked a day in their life, eating better than I do with more disposable income than I do, that they make by grifting off the system. It's irritating to think about, for sure. But these are sinful thoughts because they're only focused on the things of this world. They're not focused on the eternal. Okay. So he expands on these thoughts as we head towards the end of the chapter. We'll look at verses 18 through 23. He says, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. Okay, so it would seem that he's continuing in this attitude of despair and bitterness, but it's clear that his wisdom is still with him, because these are important questions that sort of summarize his experiment. He has worked, and he has spent, and he has built and accumulated more than any other man in history up to that point, and he's worried that it's going to be left to some knucklehead who's just going to squander it all. Well, and that's valid. I think we can relate to that a little bit. As I've talked about before, we work and we create and we build and we do all these errands and all these projects of ours, but once we're gone, who's going to say what's going to happen to them? Will the kids use their inheritance wisely? Maybe, maybe not. Statistically, more likely not. Will the next owners of your house keep the landscaping in the same way that you spent so many Saturdays working on and labored so hard over? Likely not. Okay, those things that we agonize over and put so much time and effort into are going to end up in the trash one day. Okay? Will the person who comes after us be wise or be a fool? It's a very valid question. And it's kind of an interesting side note here. I want to point out that Solomon's question here, and we kind of line it up with some Bible history to see if his hate and despair was worthwhile or not. Was he on the mark? Was he on the money with the way that he felt towards this? In other words, what happened to all of those things that he worked so hard to buy and collect and build and make? Were these things treated well? Or was it given to a knucklehead? Okay, now in the here and now, we have the gift of Scripture from God, and we get to know about what happened. We can look at 1 Kings 11, and we get some information about this. It's a long chapter. And please feel free to read it through on your own time. For the sake of time, I'll summarize. Okay, so we know that Solomon loved himself some foreign women. And we read here that they turned his heart away from God to the point where Solomon built high places for these demonic false gods of these heathen nations that these women represented. This, rightly, displeased the Lord. So God, in his holy, just anger, tells Solomon that he's going to tear the kingdom from his son. But for the sake of his father, David, he'll leave one tribe to preserve the Davidic line. God then raises adversaries against Solomon. You had Hadad the Edomite, you had Rezon of Syria, and Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And these three cats gave Solomon nothing but strife all the rest of his days. Okay, Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam reigns in his place. This is the guy who's coming after Solomon now, his son Rehoboam. The first time we're introduced to Rehoboam is in 1 Kings 12, which starts with the header, Rehoboam's folly. Well, that doesn't bode too well, does it? It turns out his son was an absolute knucklehead. Jeroboam comes to him, Rehoboam, and says he asked that the labor that was being put on his people be reduced as kind of a measure of goodwill. which will bring about some peace. There's been a lot of strife in the kingdom. Hey, you ease the yoke that's on our people, and things will get better here. And we can kind of smooth this out. And if he does, Jeroboam says that he and his people will serve Rehoboam. Solomon's advisors, still in the court of the king, advised Junior to accept this offer. Yes, this is a good deal. You should do this. Rehoboam doesn't listen to his father's counselors. He opts instead to listen to his own peers, these guys that he grew up with, who suggested adding to the labor of Jeroboam's people as this means of kind of flexing power over them. Hey, I'm the new cat in town. I'm gonna show you that I'm the new king, right? No, I'm gonna add to your burdens. All right, this repugnant, malignant narcissism, this petulance of Rehoboam causes even more strife as a result. You can keep reading through 1st and 2nd Kings, and you see all the terrible things that happen. The kingdom's divided. Israel and Judah, they have their share now of good and evil kings. They have more evil than good. You have the Assyrian conquest, you have the Babylonian conquest, you have destruction, you have exile, and the treasuries are looted and carried off by foreigners, and a majority of these beautiful and wonderful things that Solomon spent so much time and money and effort and attention on were burned and destroyed or carried away. All right. But bear in mind, Solomon obviously doesn't know any of this, so here in Ecclesiastes, his questions are valid. But the thing we need to keep in mind is that all of these vanities under the sun, they're not meant to last. And I think Solomon is starting to come to this realization because he closes out with a bit of an epiphany in verses 24 through 26. He says, "There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, I saw, is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind." So this is what all of chapters 1 and 2 have been leading up to. Okay? The wise man can eat and drink and labor and still find joy in all of it because it is a gift from God. Apart from God, there is no satisfaction in any of it. Put it this way. Okay, God gives aluminum cans of goodness to everyone, the just and the unjust alike. Everyone gets cans, but only his children get the can opener. Okay, the lost don't know. They aren't given the ability to enjoy God's gifts because, as he said earlier, they're blind fools, stumbling about in the darkness, trying to fill the voids in their lives with all manner of little goodies, but it's utterly fruitless for them. God's elect are the wise, the ones that he has gifted with wisdom, the ones who will walk in the light, the ones who receive the benefits and the enjoyment of his gifts. And look at what the foundation of these gifts are. Verse 26, wisdom, knowledge, and joy. With the wisdom and knowledge that he gifts us with, we can understand that, yes, the majority of what we busy ourselves with is a vanity under the sun, but we can have joy in it anyway. Even knowing that this joy is still chained to a tree because this world is passing away and everything except what is done for the glory of God is temporary, so there are limitations to it, but we can enjoy it nonetheless because it's all a gift. So you can fix that stupid kitchen cabinet for the 10th time this year, but you can fix it with joy because it's connected to a house that is a gift from God. You can change that flat tire on a hot August day by the side of the highway with cars whipping by you at 80 miles an hour. And it's hot and you're aggravated, but you can change that tire with joy because that vehicle was a gift from God. You can stain a new deck at great expense or labor, and you can do it with joy because it's a gift from God. And on and on and on the lessons go. We can rest completely in his sovereign will and know, factually know, because Scripture tells us that all of it is for our good and for his glory. And knowing that, we can adjust our expectations about what these vanities under the sun truly are. This shift in perspective is critical to us being able to make the best earthly good of our time here. Okay. This ends chapter 2, and the first grouped sections of Ecclesiastes. Okay, section 2, which we're going to look at next, and that'll look at the fullness of God's sovereignty. That'll be in the next video as we start with chapter 3. So, thank you for listening, and until next time, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Goodbye.